Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Many children benefit from enrolling in recreational sports, but is the financial burden too much for parents? We'll take a look at that. Plus, anyone who watched it will never forget it. Ben Johnson's 9.79 100-meter dash at the 1988 Olympics, and of course the confiscation of his gold medal afterwards. We revisit our conversation with the world's former fastest man, along with writer Mary Ormsby, with a different take on those events. That's next on the agenda. Research shows that most Canadian kids, from toddlers to teenagers, take part in some kind of sport or activity, but many parents face financial challenges trying to keep their children in the game. How can parents afford to pay for their kids' love of sports without breaking the bank? Let's find out. Joining us in studio tonight, we welcome Dan Cardoza, Senior General Manager in Health and Fitness at the YMCA of Greater Toronto. Marco Di Buono, President of Canadian Tire Jumpstart Charities. And Bruce Kidd, Professor Emeritus, Sport Public Policy at the University of Toronto, and frankly, if I may add, one of the greatest athletes this country has ever seen. So great to have you back in that chair here, and gentlemen on the end, nice to have you here as well. Let's put up this background here, shall we? This is Do Youth Sports Break the Bank? We're calling this. A recent report by Solutions Research Group consultants shared that 58% of parents interviewed, 58%, describe facing financial issues trying to keep their children enrolled in sports. The Jumpstart State of Play Youth Report has similar findings. 47% of children surveyed that do not play sports often say their reasoning for lack of participation is because sports are just too expensive. Okay, Marco, start us off. What do you want to tell us more about these findings?
Well, a couple of things. So great that we know that 1 in 2 or approximately 1 in 2 can no longer afford the cost of sport for their kids. It's the rate at which that has increased since pre-pandemic levels that is really startling. Based on our data, we knew that about 1 in every 3 families leading into 2020 couldn't afford the cost of sport. So to see that escalation in the lack of affordability is really what should be concerning. The other thing that we need to keep in mind, though, is that this is true. This cost as a barrier to participation is true regardless of where you are in the world. You can survey kids in the US, you can survey families in Europe, you can survey families in Australia. No matter where you survey, the number one barrier to participation is always going to be cost. Yet, many jurisdictions have found a way to overcome that. We don't have a systemic solution here in Canada, and given the urgency with which now families are saying they can't afford the cost of sport and play when their kids need it most, we should start to be thinking about solutions that are systemic.
And we shall get to some ideas as we continue our conversation. Are these, I mean, you're surrounded by people who are athletic and young people, I mean, all the time, right, at YMCAs everywhere. So are these numbers representative of what you see in your experience?
Yeah, I think to support what Marco just said, we see it every day. We're at the YMCA. We have about 90,000 roughly individuals and families across the GTA from Oshawa to Mississauga. And 1 in 5 utilize the YMCA's financial assistance program. And the majority of those happen to be the kids and the youth. And definitely the findings from the Canadian Tire Jumpstart report are seen every day in our centers. And one of the things that we've noticed is that since the pandemic, there has been, I wouldn't say a less of a desire, but that was a major disruption to kids' rhythm of participation. And it's a definite challenge that we're facing to try to recruit kids back and recruit youth back into our programs. And that's our focus at the YMCA, which is to try to continue to support them through our own financial assistance program, but also partnering with organizations like Canadian Tire Jumpstart. They've been a great support to us as well.
Well, here's where I get a little needlessly provocative with the former All-Star over here on my left. I can imagine there are people watching this or listening to this who will think to themselves, Bruce Kidd was one of the great runners of this country's history. What's the barrier to participation if you just want to get out and run around in the streets? What's the barrier to participation if you just grab a soccer ball and go to the park, or grab a football and go to the park? How can we have a financial barrier to participation in sports, which you would think would be fairly easy to do?
Well, One explanation or contributing factor is the immiseration of public institutions like physical education and school sports in our public schools. I mean, I went to the Olympics on the basis of public programs. My friend and colleague Bill Crothers, after whom a school is named in York region, went to the Olympics on the basis of public programs. But public programs can no longer do that. The demands for sport development are much greater, and schools and municipalities haven't been able to keep up. If you read the surveys of People for Education, you'll see that over the period that my colleagues have talked about, user fees for participation in sport have gone up and up and up, and really only parents in the rich neighborhoods can now afford the cost of a team.
But that presupposes that the school is the sort of focal point of all athletic activity, and anybody...
But it's the entry,
okay,
and it should be the basis. And I would say all of our public commitments as a country talk about the school and the municipality as the basic entry for sport. The other measure that I want to introduce, Steve, is the class background of our top athletes. Whether it's in pro sports like the NHL or whether it's in the Olympic team, the class background is much higher than it was in my era. When I grew up, the best hockey players were from small rural
Timmins,
towns.
Kirkland Lake, yes, for sure.
Well, my colleague Rick Runo at Simon Fraser has written a now famous paper entitled Gordie Howe Would Never Make It to the NHL Today. Why? Because his parents could not afford the costs of the registration fees, the skates, the travel time, the summer skill camps, and so on. So if you compared the class background of the NHL in 1960 and today, you'd see a vast difference.
Is that what you see as well?
We see it clearly every single day, and part of that has to do with the fact that we've pseudo-commercialized youth sports throughout North America predominantly. And rather than adhere to the principles of positive youth development, where kids shouldn't really be competing before the age of 13, they shouldn't be specializing in one sport, they should be sampling as many as possible. What we have is organizations capitalizing on the interest and the demand, predominantly coming from parents, and forcing kids to specialize in very specific sports throughout 12 months of the year. It leads to overuse injuries, it leads to disengagement with the kids, but most importantly, it leads to cost escalation for the parents, because now they're forced with registration fees for one sport at multiple points throughout the year, and organizations that are preying on victims, so to speak, by charging as much as they can to capitalize on the parents' interest.
Okay, let me pick up with Dan on that one. Back in the day, back when I went to school, if there was an athletic activity that required you to pay a little extra, and we knew there were kids whose parents couldn't necessarily afford to pay that little something extra, somehow it all got worked out, right? Somehow they figured out how to do it without embarrassing anybody. Does that not happen anymore?
I think it can happen. What Marco's talking about, what I would call the professionalization of youth sport, where early specialization, and there is research that supports what Marco's just said around the idea that early specialization is not necessarily the thing that's going to help kids last in sport. So like you, back in my day, if something needed to be worked out, costs were so low. But now with professionalization of youth and child sport, and we're talking about thousands and thousands of dollars. Some of the research suggests that to play hockey or to play, I have two girls, 16 and 19 years old. They played soccer throughout their life and many other things. But the costs are not what you or I might be used to. And like Bruce mentioned, my entry point to sports growing up was really around school sports and community-based programs. It was not like what my kids are experiencing.
But help me understand that, because soccer, what do you need? You need a pair of running shoes. What else do you need?
Correct. So I'll give you an example. My daughter's currently 19 years old. She plays college soccer. Her first entry point into soccer was a 12-week summer community program that cost, I want to say, $200. Reasonable. 10 years later, it was easily over $5,000 to $6,000 once you consider travel and once you consider all the bells and whistles that come with that. So it's really important that community organizations, whether it be a YMCA or your local community center, as well as schools, like Bruce mentioned, provide a bit of a sampling approach where you can get a low barrier to entry, a foot in the door, a taste test, if you will, before making a commitment.
Marco.
Yeah, I think it's important too to point out that community sport organizations aren't doing this nefariously, right? It goes without saying that the pandemic created a massive amount of disruption for community sport. It was the first thing to close along with schools, one of the last things to reopen when pandemic restrictions came off. So immediately what you had is a number of organizations that had no pipeline to keep the doors and lights on during the pandemic because they didn't qualify for the subsidies that the governments were making available. A lot of sport organizations are not charities, they're not for-profit organizations, so they fell in this in-between category of organizations that simply did not qualify for all of the reliefs. You come out of the pandemic, you go into the inflationary pressures that we're all still facing right now. For community sport organizations, the ones that charge fees, they had increased rental fees, they had increased insurance costs, they had increased equipment costs. They passed those fees on to parents because they had no choice. For organizations that charge nothing or low fee entry for kids from low income backgrounds, they had no choice but to reduce the amount of programming that they had on offer. So again, you had a supply demand issue which increased the cost of participation for everyone. And you're seeing that perpetuated now as the inflationary pressures go on, and it's creating a massive challenge for parents because they can't bear the costs that these organizations have to pass on to them.
Well, here's why this is important, and I've got Bruce Kidd here to tell us about the significance for youth development when it comes to participation in sports. What's the connection?
Well, it's huge for growth and development, confidence, skill development, resilience, health and well-being, relations with others, a sense of travel and the geography of a region. There's all kinds of learnings that occur. And so much so that those opportunities are regarded by all the international organizations signed by Canada as basic human rights, basic rights of citizenship.
So if you want young people to meet their potential, they should be in sports.
That is correct. That is correct. They don't have to specialize. I agree with Marco entirely, but they have to have the opportunity. I mean, we should be enabling every school child in Toronto to learn to swim before the end of grade 3.
How about in all of Ontario?
Well, all of Ontario, the way it used to be, those, and anyway, I could go on and on. I mean, we're a water company. We're a water country, a water province, and people should enjoy the pleasures of water. And yet, that's just one deficit.
We're losing it.
That's right.
We're losing it. And the great thing is we can now quantify the impact that keeping kids involved in sport has on society at large. So we've published a little bit of research. Others have done the same. We can show that for every dollar you invest in community sport for youth, you get $13 in savings from reduced healthcare utilization, reduced youth offending, and improved employability because they're learning skills that transfer into a professional environment. $13 saved for every dollar you invest in sport. I defy any government policymaker to find something that's that cost effective within a 12-month window. With such an important intervention that's going to, follow
If the
these kids
math
for
on this is so obvious, though, why are governments at all levels cutting back over and over and over?
It's a great question, but we're actually now starting to see smart, targeted investments back into community sport. The federal government started 2 years ago with their Community Sport for All initiative. It was $14 million over 2 years. Not a ton of money, but 14 million times 13 leads to a big impact. They have another round of investment coming in the new year. We've seen Ontario with a preliminary round targeted to community sport. Recently, they had an infrastructure fund for community sport organizations. Again, not a lot of money, but enough to lead to significant impact. Alberta has done the same. So we're starting to see governments now appreciate in a post-pandemic reality that investing in something like community sport yields major dividends in a short period of time, not the least of which is improving mental health and well-being, but also that reduced youth offending, which has seen a resurgence.
Bruce, pick up on that if you would, because I think we've all seen it over the last many years, that when money gets tight, the first thing that schools or provinces are cut back on, they go to music, they go to phys ed, they go to libraries.
That is correct.
The
and
three
it's
things
crazy making.
that you need to be a good citizen.
That is
so why does
correct.
that happen?
Well, I do not know. I mean, there's so many myths out there, and governments I guess it is that people who are sick scream the loudest, and the
That's why health
investments-
gets all the money.
That is correct. But you know, the investment in health is so important.
You can call it health.
One-
I should say sickness treatment. The investment in sickness
I
treatment
mean, just
gets all the money.
1%, just 1% of our national health budget would create enormous benefits, enormous benefits. I think one challenge is the pay-for-play culture. I really do believe we have to restore the faith in our public institutions, particularly our educational institutions. I was encouraged by the National Daycare Agreement. Why don't we have a national, federal, provincial, territorial agreement around physical activity in schools and communities?
I thought we did. Wasn't it called participation?
Well, participation gives us a D+. A D+ as our score in the 2024 report card for our ability as a society to provide these opportunities.
And let's talk about schools for just a moment, because there's a great example where you don't need additional dollars to solve this problem. You've got a taxpayer-funded asset that is literally in every community across the country. But the doors are closed outside of the hours from 9 to 3 to community organizations that want to engage with youth in the context of sport or physical activity in those spaces for reasons that can easily be overcome and addressed, but yet that's a policy lever that no one wants to pull on.
What does the why bring to this?
I think the why brings, first of all, a philosophy around access and inclusivity. Those are some of our core values. The principles of everyone having the right to play, having something that can be a fit. I think the Y provides an opportunity. Like I said, we have 11 health and fitness centers across the GTA and many more around Ontario and Canada. And I think we provide a great entry point where not just children and youth, but the whole family. That's one of the principles that I think are important. Agencies and government and schools can all provide a support system, but at the end of the day, I think families participating together and parents modeling physical activity and sport in whatever form that is. I think the Y provides a venue in addition to schools and other streams of athletic participation.
Okay, Dan, let me put an extra lens on it, though, because I think the surveys also show that while what you've said is accurate, if you're a person of color in this society, if you're part of a minority group in this society, it's even tougher. Does the Y have anything going that is specific to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Y in general is one of the more inclusive organizations. Again, that's baked right into our ethos, if you will. And we actively recruit not only newcomers, like we have an entire newcomers program with settlement services, which we then try to funnel into our health and fitness. And we see sports like, and the research bears this out, sports like soccer and basketball, which are particularly attractive to newcomers to Canada. And we see a great amount of participation with not just people from different ethnicities, but genders and all the dimensions of diversity. So we try to definitely actively support that.
I think it's the intersection of poverty with immigrants and people of color and so on that complicate the problem. I think the Canadian sports community has made a real effort to attack outright discrimination, racism, anti-Indigenous, anti-Islamic prejudice, but the fact that it's a pay-for-play culture and immigrant families are often very poor, that's the barrier.
And how do we deal with that barrier?
Well, I mean, it's got to be a partnership of organizations, but I would start with the public institutions, which have a demonstrated requirement to be accessible, at least for the first stage. And I mean, my friends in the Toronto District School Board say that they can't deliver the full legislative curriculum in physical education. After-school sports are hurting unless there are user fees, which is another barrier for some parents. So it's not all that has to be done, but addressing that, making physical education and school sport really implemented in a qualitative way across the board would really help communities like Scarborough, where poverty and immigration are really widespread.
Can you add some ideas to that?
I can, absolutely. And from our vantage point, there's this parallel ecosystem of community sport providers that are not part of the formal system, not part of the pay-to-play system. They count Indigenous-led organizations, Black-led organizations, organizations led by newcomers that are offering free programming for underprivileged youth and racialized youth across the country. These are great for two reasons. One is they're for the community, by the community. So, through self-determination, they're creating programs that meet the needs of their respective communities. But most importantly, they're eliminating that cost barrier to access and to participation. We see that ecosystem thriving much better than the traditional sports system where the pay-to-play model is in play. So these free programs that we see thousands of them across the country, some of them at local YMCAs, but many of them just led by community leaders who have an interest in increasing participation for their children and youth. They are over capacity. They are growing. They are thriving. It's the traditional sports system where you have that pay-to-play model, traditional sport clubs, hockey clubs, et cetera, that are not keeping up with the demand that exists within their communities, and it's to their detriment.
I got an idea. How about we send Marco to every school in this province with a fistful of Canadian Tire dollars and you hand them out to all the kids?
We would be happy to hand out much more money than we currently do with more support from generous Canadians. To your point, Steve, we do invest about $30 to $35 million a year in community sport from coast to coast to coast. We're very proud of that, and we will continue to do what we can. But it's going to take a concerted effort by a number of actors in the space.
And that is correct. And, this is very timely because as a result of the various crises and scandals across Canada in sport in the last 4 or 5 years, the federal government has just announced a Royal Commission to study Canadian sport and the future of sport. And there are going to be hearings where people are going to be asked to talk about these issues and their suggestions for moving ahead.
Do you know who's chairing that committee?
I do, but I'm in my senior, it's a Quebec justice.
Bruce, you're only 81. That's not a good enough excuse anymore.
A very fine woman who, the minute this is over, I will remember.
I guess my point is, do you have confidence in that process and in the person leading this effort?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. And I haven't, yes, I do.
Good to know. What can the Y bring to this dance that so far it has not? Because it sounds like we just need all hands on deck from everyone.
Yeah, I think from a philosophical standpoint, to pick up on something Marco said a moment ago, the Y philosophically will bring an emphasis and a focus on what the kids and the youth are telling us they want out of sport. Yes, a few will make it to the highest levels of high performance, and they might be an Olympian like my friend Bruce here, or be on a national team or play for a university or college one day. However, what we're finding is that kids really want to have fun. They want to make friends or be with their friends, and they ultimately want to be well. That might not be how they articulate it, but they want to feel good. And I think that the Y provides a place and a model where that is the focus. It's less about wins and losses and winning trophies or championships. There's a place for that, don't get me wrong. But to have a more inclusive approach where fun, friendship, and ultimately well-being, not just physical well-being, mind you, Steve, but mental well-being, mental health is certainly a key hot-button issue right now. And physical activity and participation in sport, Bruce mentioned it earlier, the social benefits, having a sense of belonging, modeling that and trying to be a provider that provides a layer where people can enter and participate with family, with friends, and in your local community.
I just want to circle back to something you said earlier that has really stuck with me here, which is the notion that one of the greatest hockey players ever, Gordie Howe, who came from rural Saskatchewan and who, I mean, he's Mr. Hockey. They don't call him Mr. Hockey for nothing. That if similar circumstances existed today, Gordie Howe wouldn't have made it because he didn't come from a rich family. Are we living in that kind of province, in that kind of country right now? Really?
I would say yes, although it's complicated, and there are people who are struggling to change that. But
because I'd like to think talent will
overall,
out at the end of the day, but maybe not.
No. The cost of a sport like hockey, the cost even of a sport like soccer are now so high that there is unless you're recognized and supported at a very early age, it's too expensive for most families.
Are we getting out of control here with the kids who want to play team sports, and you got to buy a team jacket for $500 and you got to have the latest equipment, and I mean the list is endless, right?
It can get out of control. The good news is when you ask kids, and you just said this, right? When you ask kids why they want to play, it's not to have the team jacket. It's they want to have fun. The number 2 reason they want to play with friends. The number 3 reason they want to make new friends. The number 4 reason they want to learn new skills. So until we start listening to kids and stop superimposing our own expectations around what their journey in sport looks like as adults and community leaders, we're going to miss the mark. So we don't need those jackets. We don't need the fancy tournaments. We don't need the fancy competitions. We just need to create atmosphere where kids are safe, they're having fun, and they're making friends, and the rest will, and it's cost effective. We're reducing that barrier, and the rest will work itself out.
I have one final prediction to make here before we close off this conversation, and that is I suspect if we had a 10,000 meter race right now, this guy still beats all of us.
Hands
right?
down.
Absolutely.
That's my suspicion. You were pretty good back in the day, Mr. Kidd. Anyway, here we go. Marco Di Buono from Canadian Tire, thank you for coming in today. Dan Cardoza, Senior General Manager, YMCA Greater Toronto, and Bruce Kidd, one of the great Olympians this country has ever produced, Professor Emeritus, University of Toronto. Thanks, everybody, for coming into TVO tonight.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
It was truly one of the greatest moments in Canadian history until it wasn't. Ben Johnson sprinted his way into both our hearts and the record books with an astonishing 9.79 second 100-meter dash at the 1988 Olympics in Seoul, South Korea. But his gold medal memories didn't last. Johnson tested positive for banned steroid use and lost his gold. Journalist Mary Ormsby takes us back to those emotional days, but follows up with some probing questions about what else was going on with the other runners in that race. She chronicles it all in World's Fastest Man, The Incredible Life of Ben Johnson. And it brings Mary Ormsby and Ben Johnson to our studio tonight. First of all, it's great to have you here, because you and I don't know each other at all. But you and I know each other very well, and it's delightful to have you back here in the studio again.
Thank you for the invitation.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. Mary, if you look at the title of the book, Sheldon, can we show the big screen here? Yeah. There's an asterisk after World's Fastest Man. Why is that?
That's because there's a story behind the story.
So it's a bit like the asterisk they put after Roger Maris's 61 home runs when he broke Babe Ruth's record.
All those things. You want to read a little bit more about what's this all about?
The asterisk is part of the story. Okay. I suspect you remember what happened on that day.
Not really.
Well, I want to take a look at it again anyway, because it was a pretty amazing moment. Sheldon, roll it if you would.
And it's a fair start. And it is Raymond Kerr with a start. It is Ben Johnson with a start. Can Kerr catch him? No! It's Ben Johnson! Ben Johnson does it again! Unbelievable!
I still get goosebumps looking at that. Do you?
I didn't know it was that fast.
Ben, when the number came up, 9.79, could you believe it?
Yes, I believe, because I was turning this kind of time in practice when I was training with Charlie back in the days.
Charlie Francis,
Yeah.
your coach.
Yeah.
Was that then the happiest moment of your life?
Yeah, I believe that from all the years of training and sacrifice, the time and the dedication, and to give something back to my mother, I think that was the more saddest moment in my life, yeah.
I have a few other bizarre questions here, starting with, why did you wear, I mean, you're wearing a big chain around your neck, which I would assume would distract or slow you down. Was it not a problem?
Well, it was quite heavy when I first bought it in Italy, and when I was training sometimes with it, it was knocking on my bones right here, and it hurts a little bit. But after a couple of weeks, start training with it, it feels okay.
You got used to it. Okay.
Yeah.
Carl Lewis came over to you, the American sprinter who was your big challenger. He came over to you to shake your hand before the race started. And according to the book, you said to him, "Get away from me. This is my time, not yours." Why'd you say that?
Because I think that was the right thing to do, because I know there's a lot of jealousy of him and other athletes and other people surrounding that moment was jealous of my accomplishment. If I'm going to win Olympic Games again in 1988, what I did in Rome in 1987. So it was just a shocking moment. So I was not there for a best friend to shake hands. I'm just here to win the gold medal.
You were there to do some business. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Sheldon, bring the picture up. This is on the podium afterwards, getting the medals. You guys did have a handshake there. Did you exchange any nice words there?
No, but just looking on his face, and he looked very upset. Yeah.
Yeah. Sheldon, if you would, let's bring up the next picture as well, because, and again, Ben, this is another question I've always wanted to ask you. You probably cost yourself 1/10 of a second by putting your arm up in the air as if to say, "I'm number one." Why did you do that?
I think that I will have another chance to run from 0 to 100 meters and lower the record, but I didn't have that chance. But I think that when I look on the scoreboard at my view, I'm almost like 11 o'clock. The clock's at 9 seconds flat. And I shut it down and said, no one can be this close at 9 seconds. It's impossible. Someone to be there. So I was confident to turn around and wave my hands in the air.
Okay. Mary, take us back now. You write that Ben almost didn't participate in this race in Seoul because he was, quote, injured, tired, and unhappy. What was going on?
Well, Ben had a lot going on in his life at that point, and he had been world champion for just a couple of months. He won that, he referenced that in '87 in Rome. He won the world championship and world record time. And there were new demands on his time, his energy with media appearances and sponsors and all this. So he left to go to St. Kitts. He and Charlie Francis, his coach, had a little bit of a misunderstanding, and Ben just seemed to want to go away and recharge and rethink everything, and went to St. Kitts and tried to relax on a beach, but he also had a hamstring injury that he was worried about.
So there was a lot of kind of negative stuff going on at this moment, just
Right.
in advance of the greatest moment of his life.
That's right. And part of that was the world's sports media and fans were watching this. They say, well, Ben's gone AWOL. What's going on? And all his competitors are training and competing, and they think Ben's just lying on a beach drinking beer and playing dominoes. Like, he's not going to be there in Seoul. But during this time, and he could probably address this a little better, but he decided that, my focus is now back on Seoul, and I'm going to get there. But it took about 6 weeks, I believe.
How did you get focused again?
Well, I believe that Charlie and I go way, way, way back since I was a young kid, and going through this journey to become the fastest man in the world or to win Olympic Games. So as I said, we come a long way and come this far and to quit. And I just come to the track one day and said, Charlie, okay, let's get the job done. We come this far, and he was quite happy that I came back. Me too. And he said, okay, warmed up, we're gonna run some 200 meters for endurance work. And I won the first, I go on the set position and I take off and I run in 20 seconds flat. I came back 20 seconds later and won 19.5 for the 200 meters. And he goes, I'm ready.
You're back on track at that point.
Back on track.
Mm. Mary, Ben had passed all of the drug tests leading up to the games, but he didn't obviously pass the drug test at the games. Why not?
The book raises a lot of questions, and we answer a lot of them. And that particular one is where I disappoint people, because I can't answer it the way I would like to with evidence. Ben has a theory, but why did Ben not pass that test is something I'll be flummoxed to the end of my life. What I can say about that test in Seoul was that the amount of the metabolites in Ben's urine was very high. And a metabolite is the chemical breakdown of the anabolic steroid that goes through your body. And that's what's measured in the urine sample. If Ben had been, sort of tapering off these steroids, that amount should have been very, very low. Instead, and there were credible experts to have said it was actually quite high. That's never been explained. And that's something to me that was always a red flashing light about why this amount and why was Ben the only track and field athlete at those Seoul Games to test positive. And he was the only one.
Ben, there were 8 men in that race. How many were on the juice?
I believe that most of them. Yes.
Maybe 6 of the 8.
Maybe 6 of the 8, yeah.
Were on the juice, and you were the only one who tested positive.
Correct, yeah.
What's your theory as to why that was?
Because jealousy, too much money was at stake for my rival and other people. But my mom's always said to me, even before it even happened, he said to me that the only way they can beat me is in the testing room. And I remember she saying that, and then I started to get scared of my life that can take it away from me by somebody might just do a sabotage or poison me or something like that. And it did happen.
You think
But
somebody spiked your water bottle? You think so?
Yes, yes.
Do you have proof of that?
I don't have proof, but I felt it. But I didn't know what it was until I tested positive.
Mary, what do we know about the possibility or the potential for that kind of malfeasance happening in what we would assume is a very secure set of circumstances?
Well, in the past, there have been all kinds of talk and gossip, and probably, I'm talking about 88 now, so the past means, the Wild West time of using steroids back then. There was some subterfuge in labs, and people would go in and possibly remove a B sample, which would be part of the entire sample. So if there's no B sample to test against the A sample, then the test was going to be negative. Money could have changed hands in general. I'm not talking about Seoul in particular, but there were ways that security could have been breached, or people would just get in there and manhandle things or drop a bottle and with a sample in it when the athlete was there to have it tested before them if they'd had a red flag on an A sample. So that sort of skullduggery could happen. Ben thinks that he was sabotaged in the doping control room. There was a mystery man, an American friend of Carl Lewis's. That theory was debunked at our Dublin inquiry. We had a royal commission to look into the circumstances.
Charlie Dubbin, a Court of Appeal judge, was presiding.
Right, and that group thoroughly debunked that. But, that would really take sort of an Ocean's 11 kind of caper to maybe pull that off in doping control in Seoul. But, I leave it right there. I don't know what happened, but Ben just certainly has his feelings about it. And we have spoken to the mystery man. The guy's name's Andre Jackson, who's just said, I didn't do it.
He denies anything.
Pretty much, yeah.
Ben, I want to take you back to the day after the race. Carol Ann Letheren, who's running the Canadian Olympic delegation, comes up to you and says, Ben, this is a hard thing I have to say, but I need your medal back because you'd tested positive. At that moment, did you think about saying to her, forget it. I want it. It's mine. I'm keeping it. Did you think about that?
I was thinking about it, but I just reach in my bag and give back to her, and she said, I'm sorry, Ben, but this is what I have to do. Yeah.
I know you did give it back to her, but did you think for a little while about maybe just hanging on to it and saying, forget it?
No, well, my mom is a spiritual person, and she saw things that nobody didn't even saw all these years, and she told me that go with God and things are going to be tough, but everything that what they taken away from you, you'll get it all back. But like she said, and what's happening now, they don't take anything from me. They just slow me down. But if God say this is for me, that's the way it's going to be. Nobody can come and say, claim this thing in here. And the gold medal that Carl Lewis has is not his gold medal. They just give him a replacement. But my gold medal is still with the IWF, or the World Athletics.
This was a moment. I mean, Ben is in trouble at this moment, and he needs an advocate at this moment.
Right.
Who was there in his corner advocating for him at that moment?
Well, in Seoul, once he got the information that your A sample had tested positive and, you need to have a hearing. This all happens very fast. There were a set of Canadian officials there in Seoul who were totally gobsmacked and panicked about everything and felt they needed a lawyer, as did Charlie Francis. And the most experienced lawyer in the city was Richard Pound, from Montreal, a well-respected lawyer and an IOC vice president at the time, a very powerful young guy coming up through the system. So the Canadian contingent was there to try to mount a defense for Ben, because at that hearing, that was his last chance to plead his case that there was something wrong with the drug test and I should retain my medal. But the book really focuses on that hearing, where over the course of time and through investigation and kind of looking at it as a bit of a cold case, I think make the argument that Ben was deprived or denied of due process from a lot of the parties in that moment.
Let me go back to before the games. Carl Lewis, his prime challenger,
Right.
flunked 3 doping tests before Seoul, and U.S. officials apparently turned a blind eye. How was he able to skate through all of that, and Ben wasn't?
Well, Carl Lewis was able to plead his case that it was inadvertent and it was a stimulant infraction. It wasn't steroids. So with stimulants, you're allowed to have a certain amount in your urine. Steroids, you're not allowed to have any. That's an automatic positive. So he quietly had that looked after, and nobody said a word for 15 years until a whistleblower let the world know about it around 2003, 2004. But it's a powerful Olympic set of officials down in the United States, and they were about 3 months out from Seoul, so there was, a lot of reason to, overturn his tests.
When you think about those American Olympic officials who turned a blind eye to Carl's positive tests, what goes through your mind now?
Corruption. That's the only way I can say it. I mean, America protect the athletes, and Congress gave Carlos the go-ahead to race against me in Seoul because he's the only one can able to come close to beating me. So there's nobody else. And the Americans always want to be the best in the world or best in 100 meters. And if someone else beating them from outside of America, then it's a problem. And then I was at the wrong place at the wrong time.
Mary, in the aftermath of the Olympics, Ben had a lot of people giving him advice as to what he should do. And the initial strategy, I gather, was to sort of play dumb, to claim no knowledge of having taken steroids, that whatever was being given to him, he was unaware of what it in fact was. In hindsight, what do you think of that strategy?
In hindsight, that was a regrettable strategy. Ben, he relied on people to guide him. He was a grown man, of course, but when he came back from Seoul, he was just split from everybody who was close to him. Charlie Francis, Dr. Jamie Astafan, his teammates, because part of the frantic time was, oh my God, Ben's been caught, and this conspiracy of silence meant we're all going to go down with him. So everybody kind of lawyered up very quickly, and Ben was quite alone from my viewpoint. So he has to move on to some other people, and it's a different sort of entourage, and that advice, I guess, was what he told them too. I mean, he could answer it himself, but it would have been a lot easier to tear the Band-Aid off quickly and say, I was injured, I had to do something to compete in the Olympics and win gold for Canada. I'm sorry, can you forgive me? That may have, eliminated the need for the Dublin inquiry. It may not have happened at all if Ben just said, you know what, let's just do this.
Do you wish you had done that in hindsight?
Well, never happened before, but I'm just saying, winning the gold medal or being injured and take what I take to recovery, but not only that, I think with my, the weather and the ocean and as a young man, the body also regenerate the blood flow and stuff like that. But like Mary said, I didn't want to send kids to take any performance drugs, anything. I just went there just to relax, because since I came from Jamaica to Canada, I went straight into track and field. I didn't have any time to play with the kids in the park or have a time for myself. It was just just straight training.
Had to grow up
That-
pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, the other thing I wanted to ask you about, Jamie Astafan, I gather, right, the guy who's injecting you,
Yeah.
before the race, at some point before the race, did I read this right? He comes up to you and he says, I want $1 million to keep quiet about all this?
He said to me that he's going to expose everything, and I said, well, if you want money, I got money in my account. I give it to you after the race, but I guess it never happened.
Mary, do we call this extortion, or what do you want to call it?
That's extortion is probably the correct word.
And the idea was, you pay me for my silence, or else I'm going to tell the world that I've been injecting you with steroids.
Well, that would be part of it, but I think at that point Jamie and others were trying to, manipulate themselves to be part of Ben's entourage after the fact as well. So the money would be coming in for everybody. So that's the ugly thing about this particular story, because Ben was making millions of dollars and was going to make tens of millions more, and that was going to float a lot of boats. And it was getting obviously very, very ugly and very close to that race in Seoul.
So tell us how it was ultimately decided that Ben would change his strategy. He would not pretend that he didn't know what was going on. In fact, he would go before the Dublin inquiry and acknowledge that he knowingly took anabolic steroids.
It was strategy that the Dublin inquiry staff, led by Robert Armstrong as the lead counsel, they were actually, it's quite stunning. The first big witnesses out of the gate, Charlie Francis, and then Angela Isajenko, who was one of Ben's teammates.
Who kept a diary and basically
kept a diary about
the whole
everything.
thing.
So Charlie told all, Angela told all, a lot of people told all who knew what the secrets were, and Ben was the last of the Mazda Group sprinters to testify. And by that point, it was about maybe 8 months after Seoul, and Ben and his lawyers, with probably some, assistance from Bob Armstrong, saying, "Look,
it's time.
It's time, and there's nowhere else to go. So you're just going to have to get up there and tell the truth."
But Ben, you say in the book that you think the inquiry was meant to clear Canada's name and punish me. You still believe that?
I believe that until this day, yes.
Why do you say that?
I believe that, Canada never was ready for my accomplishment, and since America was the big boss of the world, and Canada was a small country that I test positive at Olympic Games, and then Canada didn't even come to my rescue. But I think that the Dublin inquiry was a rich on to get me and to show the world this is the only guy who was cheating, and this is the only guy who was doing this. This is not right. And as long as I live, I'm not going to take the blame for other athletes doing the same thing. And I know that there was a clear, level playing field. And this sports called track and field is very corrupt, very dirty. And people might see a lot of people in the games running fast or doing their thing, and everybody think that they are clean. No, it's not. They can pick and choose who they want to take down and who they want, because they have other athletes coming up can fill that gap.
But the reality is you're, 28 years old now? You have been banned for life. Did you have any idea what you would do with the rest of your life, given those circumstances?
Well, I think when I went to the court in 1999 to clear my name, not to say I want to run again, but to clear my name so I can move on with my life, they denied me my rights of earning a living or moving forward in my life. So what they're saying that they're not going to give my rights back. So they're saying that the judge at the time saying that we're not going to give your rights back because we're afraid of you go back and taking the drugs. When since the government so concerned about my life.
Okay, here's where the story gets...
This is very interesting. So what they're saying is, for a black man, we're not going to give your rights back. That's it. You're finished. You're done.
Well, you've introduced the angle of race here. Do you think race was a factor in all of this?
Yes.
How so?
Because if it wasn't so, I would be still running, or my life would be fine, or my name would be cleared.
So white athletes can catch a pass, but the black athletes
can't
run into trouble.
No.
Here's where I say yes, but, because Ben did try to, he was allowed to race again. They rescinded the lifetime ban. You were allowed to race again. But you tested positive again, and then you tested positive again.
I can answer that.
Please.
There's nothing to do with track and field. I have a life outside of track and field. There's other athletes test positive, different colors, and they go ahead, keep their medals, keep the sponsorship, making money. Why me? Why I'm the only one get singled out? That's not right. That's not fair. So as long as I can live and fight for this, I will fight until the day I died. And that's what I believe.
Okay, can you help us on this?
That second test happened in 1993, and Ben tested positive for a testosterone ratio. So it wasn't the anabolic steroid itself. So there's something wonky in his system, and they didn't like it. But this test came in the middle of two clear tests, negative tests in a very short period of time. Going forward, Ben is talking about how he bailed out of sport at the time, and he was given bad information accidentally by the Track and Field Association, who said you have to appeal this second test. Ben says, I don't have enough money or the wherewithal to do an appeal. I'm done. Well, you fast forward a few years. Ben should have been given a hearing, first of all, and then he went to an arbitrator. And the Track and Field people is now, Athletics Canada. And the arbitrator ruled in Ben's favor, and not just on a technicality, but there were many things amiss with that test, including, some, questions about how lab results were interpreted. Ben being given the wrong advice at the time. He did not have a hearing. He should have had a hearing, and some other things. So Ben was provisionally reinstated in 1999 to run again. He still had to get the blessing of the, the international body. But you are correct in that fall of 1999, he was randomly tested and tested positive for a diuretic, which is on the anti-doping list. And therefore, no argument about restraint of trade or anything like that was going to hold water anymore, because he was done.
You've asked, I think at the end of the day, the most interesting question about the Ben Johnson story, which is it possible to railroad a guilty man? So I don't think you're writing this book as if to say this guy is completely blameless in everything. I don't think you're writing that.
No, not at all.
No. But you are saying there are a lot of unanswered questions about this and a lot of curiosities that seem to have befallen Ben that have not befallen others. But at the end of the day, you are asking an intriguing question. Can you railroad a guilty man? How do you answer it?
Well, part of that is in Seoul, and that's what the focus is on the book, was that hearing in Seoul. There were a lot of things that happened that shouldn't have happened, and things that should have happened that didn't happen. Ben had a right to a fair hearing. As an athlete, as an Olympian, as a Canadian, Ben had a right to a fair hearing. That does not mean, if you support someone's right to have a fair hearing, that doesn't mean you endorse their behavior, as a rule breaker. And Ben will admit he was a rule breaker. He knew. So those are two separate matters. And that's what I'm saying, why was he denied a fair hearing? We didn't really ever examine that as Canadians, as a Canadian government, sport officials.
Oh, no, they were fast to throw him under the bus ASAP.
Well, it happened, and because it happened so fast, any further discussion or challenge was suffocated in 88, 89. So it was like a case was closed. So that's what I'm looking at. Is it possible to railroad a guilty man? And I'd say if you're going to ignore a historic injustice and you purport to be a world-class anti-doping system, and you don't investigate, then you are enabling a system that is discriminatory and full of prejudice for some athletes, but not for others.
Well, let me follow up on that. Who are you maddest at today? We're a lot of years after the fact. Who are you maddest at today for the way this all rolled out?
I watched some stuff on social media over the years, and also athletes saying that, if anybody getting caught taking steroids, they should go to jail. And they're no different than what they're doing or what I did before. No difference. This, because, the IRC and the IWF, they are police, judge, and jury. They can do everything they want. They run the sports, they run everything. They can take you out anytime and you got nothing to do with it. They could just say you test positive, you're gone. And then you have lawsuit with these guys going on even right now because they do the athletes very, very wrong. And we are the slaves of the track and field. We are the guy who make them lots of money. For all athletes, when somebody tests positive, they got nothing to turn back on. They got nothing. So, and they just move on like nothing ever happened. That's wrong.
When's the last time you saw Carl Lewis?
Carl Lewis, since '88.
That was the last time?
Yeah.
If he was sitting right here, what would you say to him?
I would squeeze his hand and squash it. Most likely, yeah.
So you do not like him any better today?
No, I don't like people that like, ooh, jealous of me or whatever it is. I don't like jealous people because I'm not jealous. I like people what they are and achieve their goal. But if it's my time, it's my time. I don't care what you have and who you own. Fair is fairness. I believe in fairness. I believe in facts. And that's it.
Ben, I have one last question for you, and that is, when I went to Mary's book launch, which you were at as well, I went up to you and I asked you to sign my book. And I don't know if you remember what you wrote, but you wrote your name, and then you wrote 9.79 underneath your name. Why did you do that?
I just make a mistake. I was trying to write very fast, but the mind wasn't going.
Now, Ben, I'm not buying that. I'm sorry. I'm not buying that.
No, I always write my name, Ben Johnson, 100 meters, 9.79, and your name.
Yeah. I mean, that 9.79
Yeah.
are the three most controversial numbers in Canadian history. And you're not running away from them.
No, I'm
not. You
not.
put them on the page.
I put them on the page.
How come?
Even my phone number is 979.
So I find that very intriguing.
I know what I did. I know what happened. Nobody can take it away from me. As God is my witness, Jesus Christ, that's it. That's all that matters. My conscience is clear. Their conscience is not clear. I'm fine. I can live with that.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what the asterisk is all about. There we go. World's Fastest Man, the incredible life of Ben Johnson. And it has brought the one-time World's Fastest Man and Mary Ormsby to our studio today. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve.
And that is the agenda for Tuesday, September 10th, 2020 program. How resilient are children these days? We'll speak to some experts on whether the kids are all right to be on their own. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org, and we'll see you again tomorrow.